So when did you first meet him?
So it was probably the Beverly Wilshire, but Warren Beatty was a good friend of his. And all I remember was getting into the elevator, the three of us, and Warren introducing and Muhammad looming over, looking at us, saying, "Act crazy for me." And I looked up at him and I thought, man, this guy is out there, it was such a great thing that...
Jack Nicholson wasn't just an actor, he was Hollywood's living thunderbolt. The arched eyebrows, the devilish grin, the sense that chaos itself had somehow been given a voice and put on screen. But even legends cast shadows. For decades, rumors swirled about rivalries, grudges, and co-stars who rubbed him the wrong way. Now, at 88, Nicholson is reportedly breaking the silence, naming 6 actors he allegedly couldn't stand. Some of the names? You might expect them. Others will leave you stunned. Keep watching, because this is the countdown of the 6 actors Jack Nicholson hated the most. Let's dive in. To understand Nicholson's grudges, you first need to appreciate the storm of charisma and rebellion he brought to Hollywood. Born in Neptune City, New Jersey in 1937, Jack grew up with a secret. He believed his grandmother was his mother, and his actual mother was his sister. That revelation would only come later, but the foundation was there. Questions of trust, identity, and betrayal, always lurking in the background. Maybe that's why, when he stepped onto a set, you could feel the electricity in the air. Nicholson's path into film was anything but ordinary. He started out at MGM as an office worker, sorting cartoon department paperwork, but ambition burned brighter than filing cabinets. Soon, he was collaborating with Roger Corman, king of the B-movies, cutting his teeth on low-budget thrillers like The Cry Baby Killer in 1958. These early roles weren't glamorous, but they taught him grit, improvisation, and how to grab attention with just a glance. Then came the 60s counterculture. Nicholson was perfectly poised to ride that wave. His breakout in Easy Rider 1969 earned him an Oscar nomination and announced him as the voice of a new generation of Hollywood. He wasn't the polished leading man. He was the rebel, the trickster, the guy who would drink with you in the desert at dawn and still deliver a monologue that made your skin crawl. Over the next 3 decades, Nicholson became the face of cinematic intensity. 5 Easy Pieces in 1970 gave us that iconic diner scene, slamming the system with just a sandwich order. 1. Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, didn't just win him an Oscar, it cemented him as the ultimate anti-hero. And then there was The Shining, 1980, where his "Here's Johnny" the line wasn't just a scare, it was a pop culture earthquake. By the time Batman, 1989, rolled around, Nicholson wasn't just an actor, he was Hollywood royalty. His Joker performance redefined comic villains, setting the stage for decades to come. Fans adored him, critics revered him, and directors wanted him. But being that magnetic came with friction. Nicholson's energy was raw, sometimes volcanic. His need for authenticity could clash with the egos of others on set. And yet, away from the cameras, Nicholson cultivated a reputation as the quintessential Hollywood bachelor. Courtside at Lakers games, sunglasses hiding his gaze, he became a myth in real time. But myths attract rumors. Stories of feuds, icy on-set silences, and lingering grudges followed him throughout his career. When you've lived through 6 decades in Hollywood, it's impossible not to collect enemies, or at least people you'd rather never work with again. Nicholson, now in his late 80s, has reportedly hinted that 6 names stand above the rest. 6 actors whose presence turned sparks into flames. For every unforgettable role Nicholson gave the world, There was often a storm brewing just off camera. He was fiery. He demanded excellence. And when others didn't match that rhythm, or worse, when their egos collided, conflict wasn't far behind. According to industry whispers, Nicholson's clashes weren't about petty jealousies. They were about respect, control, and what it meant to protect one's artistry. Some involved actors whose methods clashed with his own. Others stemmed from personality, differences that boiled over under the lights. And in a few cases, the friction was said to be so strong that the two sides never reconciled, even decades later. Hollywood thrives on the stories it doesn't put on the screen. Fans speculate. Reporters chase quotes. Publicists deny. And yet the whispers linger, circling the legend of Jack Nicholson like moths around a flame. So who made the list? Who are the 6 actors that Nicholson at least reportedly hated the most? The countdown begins. Number 6.
You know what, I gotta say, I was thinking about this today. You have the coolest name ever.
Really?
Yeah, think about it. Val Kilmer. It is such a cool name.
I thought it was kind of hard, kill.
No, but it's great. It's like, who's that guy? That's Val Kilmer. I think that's so cool. You know what I mean?
When you say it.
Well, I just think that way. Val Kilmer. It just sounds so amazing.
Well, say Conan O'Brien like that.
Conan O'Brien. It doesn't say.
The first name on Nicholson's list? According to long-circulating whispers in Hollywood circles, it was Val Kilmer. And the tagline fans repeat is simple: 2 egos too big for the same set. Val Kilmer, himself a Hollywood enigma, had been carving a reputation for being both immensely talented and notoriously difficult. His breakout as Iceman in Top Gun made him a star, and his later turns in The Doors and Tombstone cemented him as a powerful leading man. But those same stories of uncompromising dedication and sometimes abrasive clashes with colleagues followed him like a shadow. Nicholson, who by then was decades into his career and used to commanding sets with a smile and a stare, reportedly found Kilmer's intensity a little too familiar. The seeds of this supposed tension trace back to the late 1980 seconds and early 1990 seconds. Nicholson was riding high off Batman and enjoying the status of being both a box office draw and an industry sage. Kilmer, meanwhile, was entering that unpredictable space between matinee idol and serious thespian. Both men valued control, both valued authenticity, and both had reputations for occasionally testing directors' patience. Industry insiders claim that Nicholson and Kilmer first crossed paths in casual social circles rather than on a shared project. A Hollywood party here, a Lakers game there, and when 2 powerful presences occupy the same room, comparisons are inevitable. Rumors began to circulate that Nicholson dismissed Kilmer's brooding intensity as posturing. Kilmer, for his part, allegedly viewed Nicholson as coasting on charisma, rather than doing the kind of grueling method preparation Kilmer prided himself on. Whether these impressions were real or merely gossip is hard to prove. But the whispers stuck. On screen, audiences never saw them together. They never co-starred, never locked horns in a single frame. Yet off-screen, the narrative painted them as 2 poles of the same magnet, destined to repel. Fans on early internet forums would compare their Joker performances, Nicholson's iconic turn in 1989's Batman vs. Kilmer's stint as Bruce Wayne in Batman Forever, 1995. Though they played different roles, the proximity of their work within the same franchise led to endless speculation. Reports from the mid-90s suggested Nicholson wasn't impressed with the direction Batman Forever took. Kilmer's stoic, almost restrained Batman clashed sharply with Nicholson's flamboyant Joker. Some journalists even suggested that Nicholson allegedly quipped at a dinner party that Batman was never meant to be that quiet. Whether he said it in jest or genuine criticism, The comment was widely circulated, reinforcing the idea of friction. The so-called receipts here lie less in direct quotes and more in public perception. Entertainment magazines of the 1,990 seconds loved pitting actors against each other, and the contrast between Nicholson's Joker and Kilmer's Batman was irresistible fodder. Fans wrote letters to editors and debated in comic book shops. Was Kilmer out of his depth? Was Nicholson overshadowing him even years later? In one 1995 interview, when asked about his Batman predecessor, Kilmer kept his response polite but vague, saying only, "Jack defined that movie, no doubt about it." Fans noticed the lack of elaboration. To some, it sounded like respect. To others, like a backhanded acknowledgement that Nicholson had set a bar Kilmer wasn't interested in chasing. Meanwhile, Nicholson largely avoided discussing Kilmer directly, but his known warmth toward other actors, Heath Ledger, for example, made the silence stand out. Silence, after all, can be as loud as a shout. If the stories are to be believed, Nicholson's alleged dislike of Kilmer was never about one explosive incident. It was about style, philosophy, and ego. Nicholson thrived on spontaneity, on finding the soul of a character in the moment. Kilmer's reputation leaned toward meticulous research and staying in character off camera. Neither approach is wrong, but when two powerful personalities embody different schools of acting, sparks inevitably fly whether or not they're ever in the same film. For Nicholson, this Cold War of sorts served as a reminder that Hollywood was shifting. The young lions weren't afraid to challenge the old guard, and for Kilmer, being quietly iced out by someone of Nicholson's stature may have contributed to his increasingly prickly reputation throughout the 1,990 seconds. Ultimately, their paths never crossed professionally, which may have been for the best. But fans have never stopped speculating. What if Nicholson's Joker and Kilmer's Batman had shared the screen? Would the tension have made cinematic magic, or sunk the whole thing in backstage turmoil? And if you think the clash with Kilmer was intense, wait until you hear who shows up next. A fellow Hollywood titan, whose career path was destined to collide with Nicholson's in unforgettable fashion. Number 5.
He's able to interact with other actors. He's very generous. He's the kind of guy that'll come to a set. I'm not this kind of person. I come to set with a little black lunch pail. I just go to work. But Will shows up, hoping to entertain everybody. And he's going to make sure that everybody's laughing.
The next name on Nicholson's reported list, Tommy Lee Jones, and the tagline is blunt: 2 men, 1 spotlight, 0 patience. Jones is a legend in his own right, sharp, authoritative, with a voice like gravel and a stare that could slice through steel. But those same qualities that made him unforgettable on screen also made him formidable off it. And according to long-standing Hollywood chatter, Nicholson didn't always appreciate the collision. The roots of their rumored tension lie in the early 1,990 seconds. By then, both Nicholson and Jones were established as heavyweights. Nicholson had already collected his Oscars, solidified his brand as the unpredictable showman, and become a fixture in Lakers' courtside seats. Jones, meanwhile, was cementing his reputation as the no-nonsense Texan with authority roles in films like The Fugitive 1993, which won him an Academy Award. Their paths crossed more in the cultural landscape than on set. Yet, even without a shared movie, their names kept appearing in the same conversations. Both men were vying for similarly prestigious parts, aging anti-heroes, grizzled mentors, the kind of roles that demanded presence. Casting directors, insiders claimed, would often weigh Nicholson's flamboyant energy against Jones's stoic gravity. When you're in the same orbit as another alpha, comparisons become unavoidable. Some fans believe the tension crystallized around Batman Forever once again. Jones played Harvey Dent divided by Two-Face in that 1995 entry, meaning Nicholson's Joker and Jones's villain existed in the same universe, just at different times. It said Nicholson was privately unimpressed with the direction the film took. He reportedly felt the franchise leaned too heavily on spectacle, losing the psychological depth he had injected years before. Jones, meanwhile, was known to bristle at suggestions that his version of Two-Face lacked nuance. On-screen, of course, the two never shared a moment, but off-screen, their reputations created a natural contrast. Nicholson was loose, unpredictable, almost playful in his menace. Jones was precise, serious, committed to realism. Industry gossip claimed that Jones found Nicholson's larger-than-life performances bordering on indulgent, while Nicholson allegedly saw Jones as rigid and humorless. Whether either man ever said so outright is debatable, but the clash of philosophies lingered. This was especially visible during award seasons. When both actors were nominated in overlapping years, press junkets and red carpets created a subtle tension. According to some reporters, Nicholson would give Jones the polite nod, but rarely more. Fans watching at home noticed the absence of warmth. Two men at the top of their game, but no camaraderie in sight. The most concrete receipt lies in the way fans have long compared their performances. Nicholson's Joker versus Jones's Two-Face became a point of endless discussion. In forums, comic conventions, and editorial columns, fans debated which villain carried more weight. In 1995, when Batman Forever premiered, critics were split. Some praised Jones's energy, others said he was over the top, almost cartoonish. In contrast, Nicholson's Joker was remembered as layered, menacing, and strangely charming. When journalists asked Nicholson about the franchise's direction, he was cagey, only remarking that he'd done his part. Fans read between the lines, interpreting it as a quiet dismissal of Jones's turn. Later, when Jones famously clashed with Jim Carrey during the same film's production, telling Carrey that he couldn't sanction his buffoonery, fans drew a line back to Nicholson. If Jones struggled with Carrey's comedic flamboyance, how would he have ever endured Nicholson's? The parallel only fueled the myth that the two men could never share creative space. The supposed rivalry between Nicholson and Jones was less about direct confrontation and more about identity. Nicholson thrived as the wild card, the man you couldn't predict. Jones thrived as the anchor, the man you always could. Together, their styles represented opposite ends of the acting spectrum. For Nicholson, this meant steering clear. He didn't need to fight for validation, his legacy was already secure. But he also didn't need the discomfort of clashing philosophies on set. For Jones, the whispers of Nicholson's disdain may have rolled off in his back. He was famously indifferent to Hollywood's social games, preferring his ranch and privacy over Tinseltown mingling. Still, in the narrative Hollywood loves to build, the idea of Nicholson quietly hating Jones stuck. It added drama to every shared awards night, every sidelong glance in archival footage. Fans came to see it as emblematic of two men who embodied different visions of American masculinity. One chaotic, one controlled. And if the idea of Nicholson bristling at Jones's stone-faced seriousness surprises you, just wait. The next name on the list is someone far closer to home, an actor whose rise came at the very same moment Nicholson was redefining Hollywood. Number 4.
Take 11.
Take 11?
I know, it's sick that 20 years later I actually remember his Take 11.
All I remember is that Michael shot one way, and then all of a sudden said, should we turn around and go this way? And I said, wait a minute, we just shot like one take, possibly two this way, and then it was like, oh, God, it was...
The next name? Robert De Niro, and the tagline that's followed them for decades. Two titans, one crown, endless friction. Nicholson and De Niro were contemporaries, kings of the 1,970 seconds, new Hollywood revolution. Each carved his own legend. Nicholson, the trickster, De Niro, the method machine. To audiences, they seemed like natural allies, carrying the banner of serious, uncompromising acting. But behind the curtain, the story wasn't quite so simple. Their paths crossed repeatedly throughout the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds, often circling the same roles. De Niro's breakthrough in Taxi Driver, 1,976, and Nicholson's Oscar-winning One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1,975, put them on a collision course. Both were the faces of gritty, anti-establishment cinema. Industry chatter says casting directors often had to choose between the two. Nicholson reportedly passed on The Godfather Part 3 in the early 90 seconds, a film that circled De Niro at one point before settling elsewhere. Likewise, De Niro was floated for roles Nicholson ultimately landed. Rumor has it that directors sometimes leaned toward De Niro for his intensity, while Nicholson's spontaneity gave him an edge with audiences. The first major hint of tension came in the early 1,980 seconds, when Nicholson was considered for Raging Bull, but Martin Scorsese, loyal to De Niro, built the film entirely around him. According to retrospective interviews, Nicholson was gracious publicly, but fans speculated he bristled privately. Missing out on such a landmark role to his peer could not have been easy. Interestingly, Nicholson and De Niro never co-starred in a major film together. For two giants of that era, the absence was glaring. Fans often asked, why didn't they share the screen? Industry insiders suggest the answer lies in ego. De Niro's process disappearing into character, staying in role for months, clashed with Nicholson's jazz-like improvisation. Directors who worked with both have described Nicholson as playful, wickedly funny, and instinct-driven, while De Niro was surgical, all-consuming, and quiet. Imagine those two energies colliding on set. Some suggest that producers deliberately avoided pairing them because neither would concede the spotlight. Behind the scenes, their reputations added to the aura of distance. Nicholson, the Hollywood insider, loved the spotlight of Lakers games and red carpets. De Niro, reclusive and shy, often seemed allergic to the circus. Fans speculated that Nicholson saw De Niro as cold, while De Niro saw Nicholson as too much of a showman. The receipts are subtle, but telling. Over the years, both men were asked about each other in interviews. Nicholson usually gave diplomatic, non-committal answers, praising De Niro's talent but without warmth. De Niro, meanwhile, kept his usual stoicism, offering nothing more than professional acknowledgement. For fans, the silence was deafening. At award shows, clips of them exchanging stiff handshakes circulated. In 1997, when Nicholson won the Oscar for As Good as It Gets, some noted De Niro's polite but restrained applause. Online forums later dissected those moments, convinced the tension was real. Critics also fueled the narrative by constantly comparing them. Both men were nominated for Best Actor multiple times in the same decades. The press framed them as rivals, with headlines like, De Niro versus Nicholson, Who Owns the 70s? These articles only deepened the sense that Nicholson saw De Niro as a competitor more than a comrade. For Nicholson, the rumored friction with De Niro symbolized the generational shift. De Niro represented the meticulous, almost ascetic school of acting. Nicholson embodied the explosive, free-spirited approach. Both worked, but only one could dominate in a given moment. Nicholson leaned into his showmanship, doubling down on roles that celebrated charisma. The Joker, Melvin, in As Good as It Gets. De Niro leaned the other way, burying himself in darker transformations. Jake LaMotta, Travis Bickle, Sam Ace Rothstein, their careers became two sides of the same coin, forever compared, forever contrasted. And while no public blow-up ever confirmed hate, the persistent rumor that Nicholson couldn't stand De Niro's coldness has never fully faded. For fans, the absence of a Nicholson-De Niro collaboration is itself the loudest evidence. Hollywood pairs legends all the time. The fact that these two never shared a marquee, that speaks volumes. But if you think a professional rivalry with De Niro defined Nicholson's grudges, you haven't seen anything yet. The next name is someone who shared not just the same stage, but the same cultural revolution, and their fallout left fans divided for decades. Number 3.
Why do you downgrade acting as a profession?
What?
I say, why do you downgrade acting as a profession over the years?
What makes you think I do?
Well, I've read it in the press. Saw it in black and white.
I
can't
think
believe the press. I don't know what we can believe in this country.
The third name on Nicholson's list, Marlon Brando. And the tagline whispered for years is this: the idol became the irritant. To younger actors of the 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds, Brando was the mountain, the godfather of modern screen acting, the man who rewrote the rulebook with A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront. For Nicholson, Brando was once an inspiration, but admiration can sour, and according to Hollywood lore, the two men's relationship eventually turned into one of the most peculiar rivalries in film history. Their connection began in the 1,970 seconds, when Nicholson was ascending just as Brando's career was taking a more erratic path. The two became neighbors in Beverly Hills, living on Mulholland Drive so close that people nicknamed the area Bad Boy Drive, with Warren Beatty completing the trio. At first, the bond seemed natural. They were icons of rebellion, living side by side above Los Angeles, each with reputations for wild parties and uncompromising lifestyles. But proximity can breed tension. According to stories passed around for decades, Nicholson admired Brando's raw genius, but became increasingly frustrated with his eccentricities. Brando was notorious for showing up late or not at all. He demanded cue cards, refused rehearsals, and often improvised lines with reckless abandon. For a man like Nicholson, who thrived on spontaneity but still valued discipline, Brando's indifference felt like disrespect. One oft-repeated rumor suggests Nicholson once complained privately that Brando didn't care anymore, while Nicholson was killing himself to keep the flame of serious acting alive. Whether he ever said those exact words is impossible to verify, but fans have quoted the sentiment for years. The irony? Nicholson and Brando rarely crossed paths professionally. Their only notable project together was The Missouri Breaks, 1976, a Western in which Brando played a bizarre, dress-wearing regulator hired to kill Nicholson's rustler. On screen, the tension was electric. Brando improvised wildly, sometimes to brilliant effect, sometimes to utter confusion, while Nicholson tried to ground the scenes with his intensity. Behind the camera, however, reports were chaotic. Brando allegedly refused to learn his lines, forcing cue cards to be hidden all around the set. Nicholson, who prided himself on razor-sharp preparation, reportedly grew irritated. Director Arthur Penn was stuck refereeing between the two styles, Brando's chaos and Nicholson's focus. Critics later noted the strange imbalance in the film, partly fascinating, partly frustrating. Off-screen, the neighborly dynamic soured further. Brando became increasingly reclusive in later years, while Nicholson remained Hollywood's gregarious playboy. Friends claimed Nicholson felt abandoned by Brando, who once embodied the ideal of the fearless actor but had retreated into eccentric isolation. The evidence lies in the Missouri breaks. Critics at the time singled out the odd energy between Nicholson and Brando. Reviews noted that Brando's performance veered into parody, while Nicholson looked exasperated trying to keep the film coherent. Fans watching decades later often comment that Nicholson's eyes seem to be asking, "Is this really happening?" There are also anecdotes from Mulholland Drive. Friends like Warren Beatty hinted in interviews that Nicholson loved Brando, but struggled with his unpredictability. In 2004, after Brando's death, Nicholson gave heartfelt tributes, but noticeably avoided praising Brando's professionalism. Instead, he spoke about Brando's impact and mystique, carefully steering away from the frustrations of actually working with him. Fans read that omission as confirmation that Nicholson admired the myth but resented the man. For Nicholson, Brando represented both the dream and the disappointment of acting. He had grown up idolizing Brando's raw magnetism, but by the time they worked together, Brando had become a cautionary tale, someone who squandered genius through apathy. Nicholson, fiercely protective of his own career longevity, may have seen Brando as everything he didn't want to become. Their clash was less about personal animosity and more about legacy. Nicholson wanted to prove he could endure, that he could stay sharp decade after decade. Brando, meanwhile, seemed content to drift, to collect paychecks, to play the eccentric. The friction between them symbolized a deeper question. Was acting about raw bursts of genius, or about sustained commitment? And while Nicholson honored Brando publicly after his passing, the private rumors of annoyance never disappeared. To fans, it was a tragic arc. The student who outlived the teacher left both grateful and bitter. Number 2.
Being Dorothy Michaels was simply trying to grab onto these puppet strings that I was trying to learn. The voice has to be a certain way.
The second to last name on Nicholson's list, Dustin Hoffman, and the tagline whispered across decades. Method clashed with mischief. Hoffman and Nicholson were both symbols of the American acting renaissance of the 1,970 seconds. But where Nicholson thrived on improvisation and charisma, Hoffman was legendary for his painstaking preparation, his obsession with detail, and his willingness to drive everyone, including himself, to the brink for authenticity. For a while, this made them kindred spirits in the revolution against Hollywood's old guard. But soon, those same qualities set them at odds. The roots of their reported tension trace back to casting tables and auditions in the late 1960 seconds. Hoffman's breakthrough with The Graduate, 1967, happened just as Nicholson was clawing his way out of obscurity. Insiders say Nicholson had been considered for some of the same roles Hoffman eventually landed, including parts that played off awkward charm and anti-hero energy. When Hoffman skyrocketed, Nicholson, still stuck in B-movies at the time, was said to have felt overlooked. By the mid-70 seconds, however, Nicholson's fortunes had changed. He had an Oscar on his shelf for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, while Hoffman was battling through the brutal shoot of Marathon Man, 1976. Industry gossip framed them as rivals, each vying to be the face of serious, transformative acting. According to interviews from the era, Nicholson reportedly felt Hoffman's style was too labored, too neurotic, while Hoffman allegedly thought Nicholson coasted too much on charisma. Neither ever said it bluntly, but the undercurrent was there. On screen, they never co-starred in a major film, though they came close several times. One notorious near miss was Rain Man, 1988. Hoffman won the Oscar for his portrayal of Raymond Babbitt, while Tom Cruise played his brother. But in the early stages, Nicholson's name had been floated for the role. He reportedly read early drafts and passed. When Hoffman later transformed the role into a career-defining triumph, fans speculated Nicholson must have felt a sting. Off-screen, their personalities couldn't have been more different. Nicholson loved the limelight, basking in Hollywood parties and courtside attention. Hoffman, though gregarious, leaned toward insecurity and control. The contrast was visible at award shows and charity events. Nicholson loose and grinning, Hoffman tightly wound and intense. When they crossed paths, reporters often described polite exchanges but never warmth. The most famous receipt comes from the 1,976 Academy Awards. Nicholson was nominated for Cuckoo's Nest, Hoffman for Lenny. When Nicholson won, cameras caught Hoffman clapping stiffly, expression unreadable. Fans debated endlessly. Was it just disappointment or something more? Later, during Hoffman's Oscar campaign for Rain Man, journalists asked Nicholson about the performance. He praised it briefly, but then pivoted to talking about how scripts evolve and how casting can change everything. Fans interpreted this as Nicholson subtly reminding everyone he had once been in the running. In contrast, Hoffman rarely mentioned Nicholson in interviews, which many interpreted as deliberate avoidance. When asked in the 1,990 seconds about actors he admired, Hoffman listed Pacino and De Niro but not Nicholson. Fans picked up on the omission immediately. For Nicholson, the supposed rivalry with Hoffman underscored the different schools of acting that dominated the 1,970 seconds. Hoffman represented the grueling, method-driven approach, while Nicholson embodied spontaneity and instinct. Both were successful, but the clash in styles meant they could never truly admire one another. Nicholson's choice to skip Rain Man shaped both men's legacies. Hoffman took home the Oscar, reinforcing his meticulous reputation. Nicholson, meanwhile, doubled down on roles that leaned into his charisma, ensuring his brand stayed consistent. Fans argue to this day whether Nicholson would have matched Hoffman's brilliance in Rain Man or if his version would have been unwatchable. In the end, the rivalry never erupted into open hostility, but the whispers of disdain, the stiff body language, the omissions in interviews, they built a mosaic of two men who simply could not appreciate each other. And for Nicholson, that kind of silent hate may have stung more than any loud feud. Number 1.
It's sycophantic with him. But it wasn't everyone, but some people did. And it wasn't entirely ineffectual. I mean, I did get jealous sometimes, I must admit.
Why was that?
At the top of the list, Shelley Duvall, and the tagline, seared into film history, madness wasn't just on screen. If there's one collaboration that shaped Nicholson's reputation for intensity and controversy, it was The Shining. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, this psychological horror classic cemented Nicholson as an icon of terror. But for Shelley Duvall, the actress who played Wendy Torrance, it was a nightmare that never ended. And though the main source of her suffering was Kubrick's notorious directing style, whispers for years suggested Nicholson and Duvall developed a relationship steeped in strain, resentment, and, reportedly, genuine dislike. The rift traces back to the shoot of The Shining. Kubrick's perfectionism was legendary, but on this film it reached new extremes. Duvall endured endless takes, sometimes performing the same scene 50 or even 100 times. Her role demanded constant hysteria, crying, shaking, screaming. By her own account in later interviews, the experience nearly broke her. Nicholson, meanwhile, thrived under Kubrick's methods. His role as Jack Torrance let him unleash his wildest instincts, improvising lines, channeling manic energy, even smashing doors with an axe until his hands bled. Nicholson, the chaos was fuel. For Duvall, It was torment. And therein lay the seed of tension. Reports from the set described Nicholson as detached from Duvall's suffering. He was focused on his craft, absorbed in his performance, and rarely intervened when Kubrick pushed her to extremes. Some crew members claim Nicholson laughed off her struggles, seeing them as part of the process. Duvall, exhausted and isolated, reportedly interpreted his lack of empathy as disdain. Whether Nicholson intended it or not, the emotional gulf grew into a lasting rift. On screen, the dynamic was unforgettable. Nicholson's Jack Torrance was pure menace, while Duvall's Wendy embodied sheer terror. The chemistry, if you can call it that, was electric. But fans who look closer often argue the horror in Duvall's eyes wasn't acting at all. It was the product of real anguish. Behind the scenes, the difference was stark. Nicholson enjoyed Kubrick's company, collaborating on ideas and improvising lines. Duvall, however, was treated as an emotional punching bag. She later described the experience as the hardest of her life. Some accounts even suggest Nicholson dismissed her complaints, joking that she was too sensitive. Again, these are rumors, hard to verify, but they stuck. As the years passed, interviews kept resurfacing. Duvall spoke openly about the toll the shoot took on her. Nicholson rarely addressed her directly, though he praised Kubrick's genius. Fans noticed the omission. Was it deliberate avoidance, or just Nicholson being Nicholson, never one to dwell on the uncomfortable? The receipts are everywhere in the footage itself. Watch the baseball bat scene, where Wendy backs away from Jack's menacing approach. Duvall's arms shake. Her sobs feel primal. Kubrick forced her to perform it 127 times. Critics later wrote that the fear in her eyes was real. Fans point to Nicholson's relentless energy in those scenes as both brilliance and cruelty, consuming everything in its path, including his co-star. Decades later, when behind-the-scenes footage leaked of Duvall crying between takes, fans reassessed the dynamic. Online forums lit up with debate. Was Nicholson complicit in her suffering? Did his intensity exacerbate Kubrick's cruelty? Or was he simply lost in his own storm of artistry? Some sided with Nicholson, arguing he had no responsibility for Kubrick's methods. Others felt he should have spoken up, at least once, for his co-star. In 2021, when Shelley Duvall gave a rare interview about her trauma, Nicholson's silence was noted again. He never publicly addressed her pain, leaving fans to speculate endlessly about whether the relationship was rooted in hate or simply neglect. For Nicholson, the legacy of The Shining is triumph. For Duvall, it is tragedy. Their supposed rift stands as a reminder of how two actors can share a masterpiece, yet walk away with opposite scars. Nicholson's lack of warmth toward her in later years, whether intentional or not, cemented the perception that he never respected her as an equal. Did Nicholson truly hate Duvall, or did he simply dismiss her struggles as weakness? Absorbed in his own performance, the truth may never be known. But for fans, the dynamic between Nicholson and Duvall remains the most haunting off-screen story of his career. Their feud, if you can call it that, was not built on shouting matches or public spats. It was quieter, colder, and perhaps more damaging, a clash not of words, but of empathy. And in the end, that made it all the more unforgettable. Looking back across all 6 names, Val Kilmer, Tommy Lee Jones, Robert De Niro, Marlon Brando, Dustin Hoffman, and Shelley Duvall, a pattern emerges. Each feud wasn't about petty jealousy or trivial disagreements. They were about something bigger, the eternal clash between control and chaos, respect and ego, discipline and improvisation. Nicholson's career thrived on energy. He demanded authenticity, but on his own terms. Kilmer's intensity mirrored his too closely, sparking repulsion. Jones's stoicism clashed with Nicholson's flamboyance, turning admiration into frost. De Niro embodied a rival philosophy, method versus instinct, making collaboration impossible. Brando, once a hero, became a reminder of how genius could wither without discipline. Hoffman, precise and neurotic, symbolized the method that Nicholson distrusted, and Duvall, the most tragic entry, embodied the human cost of Nicholson's relentless storm. Together, these stories tell us something profound. Nicholson's grudges weren't random. They reflected his values. He respected spontaneity, charisma, and fire, but bristled at rigidity, excessive control, or weakness under pressure. When those qualities surfaced in his peers, the friction was inevitable. Where do things stand now? Nicholson has largely withdrawn from public life in recent years. At 88, he rarely makes appearances beyond the occasional Lakers game. His last major role, in 2010's How Do You Know, felt like a quiet farewell. He's retreated into privacy, letting his body of work do the talking. As for the rivalries, time has blurred their edges. Kilmer has faced his own struggles with health, winning newfound sympathy from fans. Jones continues to work steadily, his reputation intact. De Niro, now in his 80s, remains a cinematic force. Brando is gone, but his myth endures. Hoffman lives in semi-retirement, his intensity now part of Hollywood lore. And Duvall, after years of seclusion, has begun to speak again, her story reframed with compassion. Nicholson's silence on most of these relationships is telling. He never confirmed the hate, never clarified the rumors. Perhaps he preferred it that way, mystery as part of his legend. And maybe that's the true legacy. Not just the roles he played, but the questions he left unanswered. Questions about loyalty, rivalry, and the human cost of greatness. Because in the end, what is hate in Hollywood? Is it a burning grudge, or just the refusal to bend when another star tries to claim your light? So, what do you think? Were these 6 actors truly the ones Jack Nicholson hated most? Or were they just casualties of clashing styles and unstoppable egos? Which rivalry surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, we'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Nicholson's hidden history, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss our next countdown. There are always more untold stories, more rivalries, more legends waiting to be revealed. Join us again, because in Hollywood, the drama never really ends.